Welcome to this episode of Rebels Reaction. I'm Tyler.
And I'm Christine.
On this episode, we bring you some Rebels news and our reactions to An Inside Man. Christine, your one-word reaction.
Kallus.
Callas. As in the character, the thing that forms on your hands, all of the above.
Play on words.
Okay, we'll get to it. Mine was foreshadowing.
Oh.
All right, let's
Good
go.
English word.
Thanks.
You know of the rebellion against the Empire?
Perhaps you referred to the imminent attack on your rebel fleet.
Where is the rebel base?
I didn't know there was anyone willing to stand up against the Empire.
All right, we're going to kick off this episode with a little bit of Rebels news. We got word this week that we're going to have an arc that focuses on Geonosis in, looks like, 4 or 5 episodes. January 7th is when they're set to air. It's going to be a 2-part episode, so similar to what we're getting with our season intro movies, the season events. So I wonder if this is, we're going to take, because I worked out the schedule, and it looks like we're going to take a break. Or at least there'll be 1 week off at some point between now and when these air.
Okay.
And I wonder if that's going to kind of be like the mid-season break, and then we'll come in with these episodes. So they're both called Ghosts of Geonosis, Part 1 and 2.
Wow.
I think I can read the descriptions. If you feel like you're not, it's too spoilery to hear.
No, don't give it away.
I'm not going to give it away. I'm just going to read what the basic storyline is about.
I don't like that.
Okay, so close your ears. All right, she took off her headphones. So if you are listening and are of the same idea of, like Christine, you don't really want to hear, I'll put the time in the notes. It's going to take me 10 seconds to read, but jump ahead real quick and you won't hear what it's about. Basic storyline: the crew returns to Geonosis in search of a missing rebel team sent in to investigate suspicious activity there, and are surprised by what they find. That's part 1. Part 2, after finding the missing rebel team, or team member, one of the team members, not the entire team, the Ghost crew discovers another surprise on Geonosis and work to conceal it from Imperial forces. Okay.
I'm back.
Okay, cool. So the arc takes place on Geonosis.
Okay.
We'll just kind of talk big picture since we don't want to be spoilery at all.
Yeah.
The big idea that I kind of got from this is Geonosis is taking on a larger and larger role in the Star Wars stories.
Okay.
Whether that's, we see it in the saga films, in Episode 2, we see it in the Clone Wars.
Yeah.
We see it in Rebels. We've already seen it in previous seasons. We read about it in the Vader comic series.
Oh.
Which is actually taking place ahead in the timeline of where we're at this point and when these episodes will air. It also shows up in the recently released novel Catalyst. So my kind of big questions as far as this information or this news goes, Geonosis is taking on this larger role and just increased focus of major plot points are happening on and around this world. So what might that mean for the arc on Geonosis? Is this just kind of continuing to add to what we already know about the system? Is it becoming more a focus in and of itself, or is it kind of keying us into what Disney might be doing and the story group might be doing with worlds that we're maybe familiar with in expanding the Star Wars stories
with those worlds?
With those worlds.
That sounds cool.
Yeah, so I mean, this is kind of a theme that has come up for us a couple times, or an idea of as we get more variation in the story, and it's not just centered around things going on in the saga films. How are we going to get this wider galaxy? What is that going to look like?
And how are we going to keep our characters alive in different worlds?
Yes, exactly. So it's providing potential opportunities for those sort of things.
Yeah.
And so I just kind of want to get your thought on that, given you have no real concept of what the arc is about.
Well, yeah, I don't want to know ahead of time.
Okay. And what you think that might mean for what the broader implications might be.
Well, my hope is that we'll get more of what's going on in the galaxy as a whole, like you and I have talked about quite a few times.
Yeah.
That each individual world has an entirely complete storyline going on at all times.
Yeah.
And there are thousands of worlds. So we know some of them. Some are just inferred that they exist. But there's things happening on every single world every moment in time that the Star Wars story is happening. So I'm excited to see more of what is going on in Geonosis, and just kind of opens my mind to the possibilities of other worlds.
Yeah, I think for me what it indicates is this concept that there are parallel stories running all the time. It's not in the sense of maybe like a Star Trek or Marvel type multi-universe thing. It's all happening in the same universe. It's just happening. The stories are happening at the same time in different places.
Yeah.
So we're exposed to parts of the story across the timeline, and we get to know those pieces really well, but there's other things in the galaxy that are going on at the exact same time.
Yeah, and something unique about Star Wars is that we get the storyline so jumped around. Like each new piece isn't the next step in the storyline or the next piece of time. Each new piece fits in between other pieces, or is before, or is later. It's really complicated, the chronology of it, which makes it fun to kind of see what's going on in other places at the same time as the things that were happening that we learned about 30 years ago.
Yeah, it provides so much opportunity for not only increasing the scope of the story, but the depth of the story as well.
Yeah.
Because even things that we see alluded to in something like Revenge of the Sith, we get a lot more depth in the Clone Wars because of that. Things are alluded to elsewhere in comics or books, and the story is deepened through another medium.
Yeah.
So I think Rebels has been a great example of that, along with a lot of the new books that have been released, adding that kind of depth to the films. Clone Wars has to be the best example for me personally in terms of adding depth, especially for Revenge of the Sith.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think it really, my hope is that Disney is taking this as sort of a test of how particular worlds that can grapple with a particular plot point, that being the Death Star. Because we see it in Attack of the Clones.
Yeah. And
Poggle having the plans, or at least a holodisc of the plans, and then Dooku taking it. And then we're getting more depth of that story in Catalyst and hopefully Rogue One. We're getting pieces of that story, whether it's post creation of the Death Star or otherwise, in Rebels.
Yeah.
And in comics. So it's just really interesting to see a wider breadth of characters taking part in major plot points.
Yeah.
And making meaningful contributions to that plot. So that was kind of my hope and thought for this Geonosis arc. It looks like, based on the description, it may be pretty dark. in terms of overall feel of the episodes.
Okay.
So are we starting to maybe get into, and this is probably a discussion for a later time, as we get into later parts of this season, are we getting into a similar feel of the later seasons of the Clone Wars?
Okay, yeah, when the dark versus light is really battling it out within Anakin.
Yeah.
It gets darker and denser.
Mm-hmm. So that'll be interesting to see. I think there's a lot of potential there. It'll be interesting because we'll have Rogue One released by the time this arc airs.
Oh, that's true.
So
that'll be cool.
How we might see pieces fit together.
Yeah.
Different characters may show up in that film, maybe not. But I think we'll see a lot of pieces of what comes up in Catalyst, or at least part of the storyline coming up in Catalyst. So if you haven't read Catalyst, I mean, you got right around a month before we get this arc, so I would highly recommend doing that. And I mean, reading it before Rogue One, probably, or after Rogue One, if you don't want any sort of spoilers, might be kind of fun as well. So that wraps up our news story. We're going to see if we can do this a little bit more often as Rebels news comes out, and maybe even just kind of attaching to an overarching idea and talking about it a little bit more. So we'll be right back with the Big Three. Okay, so this week's Big Three. Number 1, I have back on Lothal.
Yeah.
Ezra's home,
fun.
And he doesn't like what he sees.
Yeah. It's not going so well for Lothal.
Lots of digital banners.
Yeah.
I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah. It looks like communist USSR.
Or
big red banners.
Nazi Germany.
Or Nazi Germany.
Red
is generally a bad color on a flag.
Generally, at least in terms
always.
of United States history goes, I guess. So the ghosts, at least Ezra and Kanan, we see them on Lothal, and they are waiting for Ryder, who they helped escape from prison, and he was the governor of Lothal at one point.
Yeah.
Knows Ezra's parents, or at least thinks he knows what happened to them.
Yeah.
And is leading a resistance against the Imperial presence or occupation of Lothal, and has infiltrated the manufacturing base there.
Yeah, which is brilliant and super cool.
So as Lothal's the Imperial presence starts to conscript or force farmers into labor there, or provide them no choice because they take away their farms.
Yeah.
Ryder mounts this resistance against them by sabotaging the equipment that they're building. Mm-hmm. And that leads us to number 2, where we then see Kanan and Ezra in the factory itself, and Tron happens to be there, trying to root out any moles or figure out why the
equipment keeps malfunctioning there.
Exactly. And I thought it was really interesting with Thrawn. He kind of throws out these statistics as far as how much more the equipment fails from this factory than anywhere else.
Yeah.
So that leads him to believe that they're intentionally breaking things.
He's so logical, mathematical.
Yeah, in the fail rates. And then how cold and calculating he was in exposing Rebels. It really seemed like it was very intentional as far as who he chose to test the speeder.
Yeah.
And later on the walker that malfunctions.
Yeah.
That he is pointing out exactly who the problem people are. So he must have greater background knowledge on this. At least that's what it seemed.
He knows a little bit about what's going on.
That's what it seemed to me, as opposed to really just kind of getting lucky.
Yeah.
And that would fit into what we know about Thrawn as far as his character, his preparedness for whatever situation he finds himself in.
He has a big picture generally going at all times.
And that picture gets a little bit wider, and I think his mission sort of changes throughout the episode as things happen, because on this base, and a big reason why Kanan and Ezra are there is to try to steal some plans.
Yeah.
Which is a little bit where my word comes in. As far as foreshadowing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's not really foreshadowing for Rebels per se, but foreshadowing as far as the Rebels are working to steal plans for what kind of weapons the Empire is building.
Yeah.
So, i.e., Rogue One.
Yeah, there you go.
So I thought that was an interesting parallel that we kind of see in this episode, that not only are we getting some sabotage, we're also getting some technical espionage. Mm-hmm. I had to think of the word. Mm-hmm. And how the Rebels are starting to approach dealing with an organization in the Empire that is outmanning them technologically in manufacturing and manpower, and how they're trying to do anything they can to gain any sort of advantage.
Yeah.
And it was really interesting, the plans that they did steal, as far as a TIE interceptor, at least prototype,
with shields
that we've never seen. Yeah, and it has shields, which makes a TIE fighter that much more menacing.
Yeah.
And practically, I wouldn't go as far as saying invincible, but far more lethal.
Yeah.
Because
definitely.
they're not just
sending pilots out to die.
Yeah, pretty much. So that'll be interesting as well, because we may see something along those lines of that sort of designed ship in Rogue One, which would be really cool.
That'd be super cool.
I would love to start seeing greater parallels between Rebels and what we're going to see in Rogue One.
Yeah.
Whether that's before or after we actually get the film, because they're happening at the same time.
Yeah.
And kind of goes back to what we were talking about in talking about the arc for Geonosis.
Mm-hmm.
We have Star Wars Rebels going along its timeline.
Yeah.
We have the timeline of Rogue One, which it'll be really interesting to see how they tell that story, especially after reading Catalyst, because Catalyst story ends in terms of the timeline well before I would think Rebels even starts.
Okay. I haven't got to the end yet.
Based on my best guess.
Okay.
But it sets up so much for Rogue One and even Rebels. Mm-hmm. We haven't gotten a ton of it in Rebels yet, but I think we're going to start seeing more. But I really would love to see pieces of each show up in each side. So things from Rebels showing up in Rogue One, things from Rogue One showing up in Rebels.
Yeah.
Because they're happening at the same time.
Yeah, there should be overlap there.
So I'm intrigued and will be really interested to see what that is, or what that looks like, how they do that. Yeah. And then number 3, well, I guess these kind of tie together. I was going to talk a little bit more about Thrawn rooting out moles, but number 3, Kallus exposed / plan stolen, and we just kind of talked about plan stolen.
Yeah.
So Agent Kallus admits to, or at least claims that he is Fulcrum to Kanan and Ezra.
And has the secret passcode or whatever it's called.
Yeah, which at the end of the episode, when Kanan says he happened to know it, I don't think he totally believes. I think Ezra may be a little bit more inclined to believe that Callas is who he says he is. I think Zeb probably believes him as well.
Yeah, Zeb says, I think I recruited him.
Yeah, which was kind of funny because that would seem to be the case, at least as far as Kallus throughout this episode and throughout previous episodes has hinted that he has at least second thoughts about how the Empire runs things, but hasn't outright defected. He is using his position to pass at least some information to the rebels via Fulcrum, but there's no indication, at least at this point, that he really wants out, although by the end of the episode, it seems like Thrawn is on to him.
Yeah. Crazy.
So
Thrawn pretty quickly figures out that someone has to be on the inside.
And it's a matter
of...
He
always knows what's going on.
Who that might be.
Yeah.
And the feeling I got was...
Thrawn's messing with Callas.
Yes, exactly. So waiting for Callas to slip up to the point of him being fully exposed.
Yeah.
So that'll be really interesting to see. Callas seemed nervous.
Yeah.
Especially at the end of the episode. So we may see a defection and Callas becoming an active participant in the Rebels. I hope he survives.
Yeah.
To be, at least for a while, to be a larger, take on a larger role. He would be a character I would really love to see show up in Rogue One.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Especially because he has clearance or rank to be able to really make a difference in
do
terms
some cool
of
stuff.
Yeah. So again, we're getting to that point where there's going to be a lot of crossover between what we see in Rogue One, what we see in Rebels, and I'm really excited to see what that might look like.
Yeah.
Anything that you really liked about this episode or thought was really strong?
Really liked Kallus coming out in the open. And we've talked about it. We said we were pretty sure it was him as Fulcrum a couple weeks ago or a couple episodes ago.
Yeah.
But it was nice to see him come out in the open. It was just fun. I like Callas a lot now. In the early seasons, he was annoying to me because he never did anything right. Like, the Rebels always won super easy against him.
It is kind of interesting that he's kept his job this long.
Yeah, seriously. And he's, like, rising the ranks.
Well, I don't think his rank has really risen at all, but...
Still high.
He's not as... I don't think he has as much autonomy as he once did.
That's true.
But he hasn't lost his job.
Yeah.
So there may be other things that he's doing that go well, or the few times that he has some level of success that is enough to keep his job.
Yeah.
But it is kind of interesting that in spite of so much failure, at least at the beginning of the Rebels series, that he's still in the position he's in.
Yeah. And he is now kind of under Thrawn's thumb. He's helping him, kind of part of his big three, but he's also very tightly overseen by Thrawn now because he's with him almost all the time.
Yeah, at least as far as how we've seen.
Yeah, what we've seen.
Well, he wasn't at the Skystrike Academy. Thrawn wasn't there.
Oh, that's true.
And Kallus was there investigating.
Yeah.
So there's been times where they've been in the same spot, and I think we're going to see an increased presence of Thrawn around Kallus.
To wait for him to slip up.
Yeah, because I'm pretty sure he knows.
Yeah.
I thought Thrawn himself was really good in this episode in two ways. His normal, cold, calculating self, but I did get a sense of some vulnerability in Thrawn as the episode went on, particularly when he kind of comes to the realization that there's someone on the inside.
Yeah.
Even though he exudes this feeling of, I know who it is.
Yeah.
He still, at least at moments, kind of seemed vulnerable to me as far as, okay, I need to readjust my strategy.
Yeah, we don't have it all in hand.
And have, in the moment, recalculate, readjust to the situation.
It's something he didn't foresee.
Yeah, which is the first time we've really seen that in his character.
Yeah.
Every other time we've seen him, he has pretty much laid the board out, set the pieces in place, and just kind of watched and observed and made his move when he needed to.
Because he knew it was coming pretty much.
Exactly. So I think he was kind of taken aback by the fact that Callas aided them as well as they ended up stealing the plans.
Yeah.
Because he put things in place to really try to make that a difficult thing to do. And I got the sense that he genuinely thought that they were safe.
Yeah.
And he
was surprised by the fact that they beat him.
Yeah, and he still knew that by the time the workers escaped, Kanan and Ezra, that they would probably be dressed as something else now, probably as troopers. I think the one thing he didn't necessarily know was that that Chopper would be there with them.
Yeah.
And Chopper's really the one that did a lot of the work in terms of hitting that. So, and I still really... Something that's been a little bit confusing to me over the course of the entire series is that anytime they try to infiltrate a base, they just paint Chopper a different color.
Yeah.
And he fits right in. Like no one
questions him.
Even though no other droid that we've seen so far from the Empire looks like him.
Yeah. That is interesting.
So, just a thought. We'll see if anything comes of that. And then I think Callus's story becoming more interesting.
Yeah.
That he's gone from this guy that is the nemesis of the rebels
and super lame
and fairly incompetent to someone that is somewhere in this gray area of still fulfilling his role with the Empire, but considering the things that the Empire's doing and taking that and changing the way in which he's operating by providing information to the rebels.
Becoming more complex.
And now really being in a vulnerable situation and probably having to make a really tough decision as to whether he's going to continue in his role or going to find the first opportunity he can to defect and leave before he's put in a situation where his life could really be on the line.
Yeah.
So that'll be another interesting piece or story arc to see as we move forward and how that plays into the wider story.
Yeah. And really, he could be selfish enough to just decide to align with the Imperials 100% again.
I don't really get that sense. I think as he saw people in the factory, especially this episode, lose their lives over... especially as Thrawn knew things were going to malfunction. Like the guy, what's his name? Morad on the speeder. Saying, I need to shut it down, and then Thrawn saying, nope, we're going to see what happens, and him dying.
Yeah.
And it seemed to me that Kallus was very... very taken aback at a minimum taken aback, but distraught over that treatment of people.
Yeah.
And really having second thoughts as far as how the Empire is doing things and the people he's working for.
Yeah. Which is, it's fun to see that, well, it's fun to see him changing. It's not fun to see the existence of that scene. That was horrifying.
Yeah. And it is kind of, we're moving into that darker realm when it comes to...
So this is where my word comes in.
Okay.
Obviously, Kallus as the character.
Yeah.
But calloused as in we as an audience are becoming more calloused and the characters are becoming more calloused. Obviously, Thrawn has always been cold and calculating, but that was still a pretty heavy move to just basically murder this guy in front of everybody in a everyone sees it coming way and nobody stops it.
Yeah.
And the fact that Kanan and Ezra didn't do anything. I mean, it would have outed them if they had, but in the past they would have done something. They would have helped somebody. But they become callous to the war, to the experiences they've had, and they're seeing the bigger picture now. They're not looking at this person's individual life. They're thinking about their mission. What's the point of what they're doing rather than help this person because this person is in need. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think when you get into war itself or open rebellion, that happens at a certain point where you do become calloused or jaded towards what you would have once done something that that's a terrible situation, and Ezra tries
For a second, he starts to step forward, but then all Kanan has to do is put his hand on his shoulder, and he's like, okay.
Yeah. That it's really, and I think that a lot of that had to do with he knew Morad before.
Yeah.
And if it was someone that they just met, probably wouldn't maybe have been the same reaction.
Mm-hmm. But it's someone he's known his whole life.
Yeah, and I think that is indicative of how the story is becoming increasingly dark, and the times are becoming much more desperate as far as we have a mission that we're here to accomplish. Yes, it's sad that people are losing their lives because of it, but we need to make sure that they're not doing it in vain, as opposed to trying to save them and then compromising what the end goal is.
Yeah, which is a very callous view of the situation. It's necessary in war, but is no less hard.
Yeah, and as an audience, it's hard for us, but we are becoming calloused in the same way because we're sort of on the same emotional drive as our characters, or at least our main characters, and it'll be interesting to see how they continue to play with that moving forward. And I think they're setting us up in some way for whether it's Rebels itself or another piece of the Star Wars story that we may be exposed to. That sort of being okay in a sense of that immediate loss for future gain.
Yeah. And that's kind of a hard place to be as an audience too. But like you said, we're kind of following along with our characters, so we justify them instinctively because we're along for the ride too. And we've seen the same things to an extent that they have seen. We've seen, obviously, not every detail because there's just time in between each episode, but we've seen the growth of the rebellion and the growth of the war they've been part of, and we have become callous to minor details. We see the big picture, so we want them to accomplish the big picture too. Yeah.
So it's a very interesting time in terms of the series, in terms of Star Wars overall, and how the film Rogue One is going to play into what these characters are doing. I'm excited to continue through this season, and my hope that we really get to see a lot of the parallels between the two.
Yeah.
Would be really fun. Really strong episode.
Yeah.
Overall. This has been a great season so far.
It has.
No real, and there, one or two sort of feel like filler episodes, but really nothing like the previous two seasons. We're getting into the meat of the story.
Yeah.
And it's been really fun. All right, I think that wraps up this episode of Rebels Reaction. Next week, it looks like we have Visions and Voices. I think it's going to be a Force-heavy episode.
That sounds fun.
I hope so. Maybe I won't read the description to you, but we'll see what happens.
Don't spoil it.
Okay. Be sure to check us out at unmistakably-starwars.com. We're here every Monday that there is a Rebels episode. Be sure to like and subscribe.
Yeah.
On iTunes and Facebook and Twitter. Had to remember all the social medias we're on. We're at Unmistakably Star Wars. Facebook.com/Unmistakably Star Wars. Tomorrow we will have our main podcast. Thursday we have Star Wars on Tap, and we may have another part 2 of the primer for Force Discourse. I'm not sure when that is supposed to drop. Lots of things coming out all the time, so be sure to keep up. We're excited for Rogue One. Have our tickets to IMAX 3D. Hopefully you have yours too. We'll catch you next week. This has been Rebels Reaction. I'm Tyler.
I'm Christine.
Until next time, may the Force be with you.